students vandalizing the Ministry of Health, and also the events that spiraled out of control. Well, to talk about all of that, we've got Dr. Vantage here with us. A very good evening to you, Doctor.
Good evening, Stephanie.
Well, the GMOA strike. We see Dr. Nalin Herath being the convener of the GMOA, being under investigation after that statement, bold statement on his behalf that was made. And now he's under investigations, and you see students vandalizing the Ministry of Health in protest. And to counteract that, we see the GMOA taking a stance decision of calling a strike action, putting most of the patients around the country in much turmoil. So do you think that this could be resolved anytime soon? Because the program airs on Thursday. But do you think within about a week they'll be able to bring in a new solution? Because they have been dragging this for quite a long time. Saturday was a day that they wanted to call off the strike, but since a favorable decision was not reached after the discussions with President, they've somehow extended it. Do you think any sort of a solution can be a permanent solution for this crisis? Because this is not the first time the strike action was called in. This has been happening for some time.
Well, Stephanie, you know, I've been a student activist, and I've been a senior lecturer at the university. So I'm responding to it from that vantage point. I've seen all this happen before. I'm also the nephew of Vice Chancellor of Peradeniya campus, so you know I've seen generation upon generation of this sort of thing happening. In 1980, when the present Prime Minister was the Minister of Education, you had a huge student upheaval. The one that's happening now is not, I think, as big as that one was. It was on the white paper for higher education that he introduced, a kind of a dramatic restructuring of the educational system, forming what are known as cluster schools. So the university students objected to that. And there was another issue, the private medical college. What we are talking about with CITEM was already prefigured in this private medical college of 1980. Now these are the two issues, the white paper and the private medical college. And you had this massive student upheaval. I remember the leader of the opposition, Mr. Amithalingam, went to Katubad University because students, some of whom are now very well-known people in society, were on a hunger strike on the roof of the Katubad University, Morato University. It was called Katubad University at that time. So it seems that whenever there is a UNP government which is trying to, or perceived as trying to tamper with free education and kind of commercialize education, it unleashes a huge wave of student upheaval. Now in 1980, students marched on Golfes Green. They were baton charged by mounted policemen, and one girl who was trying to avoid being crushed by a horse, a mounted policeman, jumped down from the embankment and broke her legs. Now these are my memories of that time, and I can see it happening all over again. So what is important here is to be very prudent and to defuse the situation. Now let's take what we saw recently on our TV screens. The students occupied a ministry.
Right.
We are told they trashed the place. We haven't seen that on CCTV, but anyway, they did something that is against the law.
Yes.
Of course, most of my life I've seen students all over the world doing this kind of thing. If you remember the Occupy Wall Street protest in the United States, they went on for weeks and weeks.
But punitive measures were taken against
punitive measures. Now, the question is not whether or not punitive measures should be taken. The question is, what are those punitive measures and how do they play out on the TV screens? Now, If we were doing something illegal or violent in this building, and somebody wanted to clear us out, what would be the smartest way to do it? The obvious way, Stephanie, when there are students or anybody occupying a building and you want to clear them out unless they have guns, then you're talking about something else. But if they don't have guns and they're not holding anybody hostage, at knife point, the simplest thing you do is to toss in some tear gas grenades. Couple of tear gas grenades into that ministry, and every one of those kids would have come rushing out. Instead, what happened was, or in addition to the tear gas grenades, I don't know whether there were tear gas grenades, but if there were enough tear gas grenades thrown in, they would have come out. What we did see were specially trained special task force, that's an elite police unit, used for counter-insurgency. STF in camouflage uniforms and with vests, protective gear, storming a building full of students and clubbing them. Now that's not a way you get people out of a building. You get people out of a building by throwing in tear gas. When you don't throw in tear gas, and these are highly trained policemen, including riot police, there were two squads, STF and riot police, they know what to do. You lob a tear gas grenade in there. I've been tear gas, I know what it's like. I've been tear gas more than once before I sat for my final exam, and then as a teacher trying to find out what happened to some students. One of the students was shot in 1984. That was also UMP government, by the way. Two students were shot dead in 1984, one at Peradeniya and one in Colombo, Havelock Road, within 24 hours. I was there, I saw one shot. One of those, and he was taken while bleeding to hospital by a very well-known political columnist today, C.A. Chandraprema, who was a student. I saw them being taken, but they were stopped by the police and that chap bled out and died, the student. Anyway, tear gas would have been the trick. They didn't use tear gas. Then you have to ask yourself, what did they want to do? Did they want to clear out the building? In which case, why didn't they use tear gas? Or did they want to hammer the students? Because the only reason you go into a building, you charge in, you know it's full of students, and you wield rubber truncheons, is because you want to give them a serious beating. And the whole of Sri Lanka saw that, and these are medical students. These are the smartest. I mean, if you take the cabinet and you take the batch of medical students, those kids are probably much smarter and did better at the exams than the whole of the cabinet. So you hit them on the head, and that's seen. One of the bravest things I saw, and I wish a newspaper had caught that, because in any other part of the world that would have been on a magazine cover, was this girl in a kind of a black t-shirt who darted in, grabbed a boy, hugged him, and kind of cartwheeled him away, just before the button hit. Right. And the same kid went back in, right, and did the same, well, not quite as cinematically, but with two other boys.
But doctor, we need to consider the fact that these attempts by the GMOA or even the students are being taken at the expense of people, the citizenry, patients who are dying in hospitals, in government hospitals, who can't really afford to pay for a doctor.
Absolutely.
So why, when you take an oath, when the doctor takes the oath to become a doctor, to save lives, he's defeating his own purpose of being a doctor.
But he doesn't take an oath not to go on strike.
Measures it indirectly. He
doesn't take an oath not to go on strike. Yeah, but and as far as these guys are concerned, they are preventing, they say, they're preventing patients from dying in future at the hands of unqualified or underqualified doctors. Now, I'm not buying that, but what I am saying is there was a very simple way, and there is a very simple way of solving this.
And I'm sure there is a simple way of solving this. We'll find out after this short commercial break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. You are watching Vantage Point. Well, the President had boldly made a statement that the country will become a medical giant by the year 2020. President seems very optimistic about it, especially given that he was a former health minister. He would have maybe had an idea of handling this better, or had measures to take against such an act. But do you think the health sector can be turned around? Now there's hostility among students about the government and among the GMOA, the biggest body in the medical sector of the country, which pretty much controls other hospitals, because doctors are the backbone of a hospital, so to speak. Do you think this is going to be a reality, medical giant, by the year 2020?
No, I really don't think so. I don't think we're going to be a giant in anything constructive by 2020 at the rate things are going.
But we see countries like India, Maldives, people from India and Maldives coming to Sri Lanka for surgery, because we have qualified doctors.
Oh, we have wonderful doctors. I mean, our doctors do brilliantly everywhere in the world, and our doctors are first rate. That is one of the few things that's true. But it doesn't mean that we are going to do well in the health sector, because the direction of movement, it's like a downward moving escalator. The garbage is on the streets. I mean, what's really moving up, except for I don't know, the value of the dollar in relation to the rupee. So we seem to be on a downward moving escalator. That's why I think this won't get done. But it can be done. Now, how can these people resolve this problem? It's very simple. It's like in life. If you've been there before, you try to remember what you did to get out of it. As I said, there was a huge wave of student agitation, wave upon wave, in 1980 over the private medical college and the white paper on higher education. J.R. Jayawardena was far more powerful president than President Sirisena. The government was far more powerful than this government. It had an organic 5/6 majority. That means they didn't get it together after elections. They won a 5/6 majority. The Prime Minister was, far stronger personality, Prime Minister Premadasa, than Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. But such a strong government, a government where even Madam Sirima Bandanayake had been disenfranchised, such a strong government, and yet it had to take over the private medical college and turn it into the North Colombo, Saragama Medical College. They had to absorb it into the system of free education with the state education. Now, if J.R. Jayawardena, Ranasinghe Premadasa, Lalith Athulat Mudali, Ronnie DeMel, Gamin Dissanayake, Ranil Wickremesinghe, the UNP's A team with a 5/6 majority could not maintain the private medical college in Ragama and had to take it over. What makes this government think that it can do otherwise? I don't get it. I mean, it's not about right and wrong and wise and unwise. That government in 77 couldn't hold the line. I mean, do you know the numbers of students we have in our universities right now? These are just the medical students. There are campuses all over the country, and there are huge numbers. If they hit the streets, and it looks like that's going to happen, and they keeping on, what are you going to do? Shoot them? How long before the military turns their guns against the authorities? It's happened in other parts of the world. They're not going to keep smashing the kids' heads on behalf of this government. It's not going to happen. It will ignite something else. Now, just take the JVP. The JVP helped bring this government into office. The JVP. Not the frontline guys who are breakaway, but Handunetti and all these people. Handunetti is one of the most decent MPs, one of the most successful MPs that I can see in Parliament. Look what he did during COPE. Now, what did Handunetti say in Parliament? He was provoked by the UNP government into saying, if I have to, I'm going to take an iron rod myself. Basically, if you push me into this situation, this is what even I'm going to do. And then Rajit had to say, don't say that. If you say that, the other guys are going to take T-56s. I don't know whether he meant the army or the STF or the rival frontline Socialist Party. But if Handunetti can sound so radical, that's because he's being pushed. His back is being pushed to the wall, and these are people who helped throw out Mahinda Rajapaksa and bring in the January 8th government. Why are they being so radicalized? They're being radicalized because the government is handling it all wrong.
But if the GMOA had a genuine intention of really pushing the government to take action against Saitam, don't you think that they would have stopped all duties altogether? Stop treating patients in private hospitals as well, if their intentions were genuine?
Well, I think it's because their intentions were sort of genuine that they continued treating dengue patients. I mean, look, those services are running. The anti-epidemic stuff is running.
Yeah.
At the IDH and Jawadanapura.
But they threatened to stop that as well. There came a point where they threatened to stop.
Well, if you arrest these guys, you know, they're going to do that. See, when you play a game, one thing my father taught me is never start anything you can't finish. This government cannot take on everybody. You've got monks, you've got the Asgiriya chapter, I'm not talking about the BBS, coming out against you on a certain issue. You've got the workers saying you're going to sell off state assets, and they went on strike, and then you had to back off. You've got students, you've got doctors. You can't take on everybody, especially when you have problems in your own government. And these are problems not only between the UNP and the SLFP. Minister Bijaydas Rajapaksa, who I think is a comer, I mean, I'd watch him, he's positioning himself very smartly. He's UNP, he's not SLFP. And he's saying stuff that's completely contrary to what Mangala Samaraveera, for instance, is saying. It's two different positions in the UNP. And then there's a big gap between the UNP and the SLFP. Now, when you're in that situation, you can't be taking on doctors and students and workers and monks and so on. You can't handle it. You have to take a step back. You have to take stock. The way to do it is you need a neutral umpire. The only neutral umpire I know on this issue is the Sri Lanka Medical Council. So the president should call them in and say, tell me what you think is the right thing to do, I do it. And then do it. I mean, don't necessarily go by what the students are saying. They're not the government. Don't necessarily go by what the GMOA is saying, though the GMOA, you know, you really can't supplant, you can't send the GMOA home and then get the army or the STF to play doctor. So these guys have a strategic niche which nobody can supplant. You know, they can't be thrown out. You can't continue unless, as somebody said half jokingly, this is all a plan to get doctors down from India. I mean, that will lead to far worse problems. But anyway, so get the Sri Lanka Medical Council over, tape your conversations, because look what happened about the negotiations with the president. Both sides, you bring your tape recorders, record it, and agree on a joint statement. I mean, we do that all the time. When I was a diplomat, I mean, you know, it's very simple. You agree on a joint communique, and you co-sign it, and you send it out. Then it's taken seriously. Stick to whatever you agree to, otherwise people don't trust you. But let the Sri Lanka Medical Council, which is the highest, I mean, the apex professional body, be the one that solves this and go with that solution. The thing about these students, and I listened to that guy, that doctor who was, who said is being investigated. I watched him on TV like 3 times because I watch all the news channels. And what he said was, we have warned the government, not we have threatened the government. We have cautioned this government, don't push these kids, because the only thing left to them now is violence. I mean, they'll go get themselves armed. Now, don't forget that these doctors were medical students. When they look at these kids, they see themselves 10 years ago. They know what has happened in this country. So what this Dr. Nalinda somebody, I think,
Herath.
yeah, was saying is, hey, don't do this. You're beating up on them. These are very bright kids. They're going to get mad at you. And then, you know, it's going to get out of control. And this is a country in which, I mean, everybody's talking about reconciliation in the north. You had two massive southern insurrections, upheavals here. Don't trigger a third. I mean, those things didn't come out of nowhere.
So it was just a warning.
It was a warning. And you know why I'm sure it was a warning? Because Handunethe said the same thing. I mean, not that Nalinda Herath is a JVP. What I'm saying is when two people say the same thing.
There's also talks of how there's a political movement involved in this whole upheaval. But we'll get back to that topic soon after this short commercial break. Welcome back. You're watching Vantage Point. Well, Doctor, we've got 8 minutes to go. Very quickly, what is the reason behind this upheaval? Is it a political agenda that's lying behind? Is there a political movement that's backing this?
Well, like I said, I've seen this before. There's a sacred cow in Sri Lanka, and that's free education. It doesn't mean that you don't have private universities. You have plenty of private universities. But when it comes to the medical profession, there's always been this sense that we are internationally very competitive. They're very proud of the standards. And quite rightly, as you were saying, people come here for their operations. So you've got very high standards. You've got a renowned medical service.
Right.
And therefore, there's a kind of a protectionism. They don't want standards lowered through privatization. That's why the private medical college kind of disappeared.
But we see these protests intensify only in this administration, as in there were protests before, but it wasn't as intense as it is now. Well, what is the reason? Is it because the government currently is more democratic and it doesn't have an iron grip around this movement?
No. It can't be democratic if you have a 52-member opposition which isn't the opposition and a 16-member opposition which is the opposition. So it's nothing to do with democracy. It's that from the 1950s, maybe 5 times, except for Mr. Premadasa, President Premadasa, every time you had a UNP government, it has embarked upon policies that have triggered protests among trade unionists, students, and Buddhist monks.
Is it because they are more of a liberal kind of party?
Liberal,
they have more liberal thinking, even though it's a conservative.
No. It's not so much the liberalism. It's the kind of the non-national, pro-Western, pro-market.
Is that the reason why people have this hostility?
It's an image problem.
It's an image problem.
It's a profile problem. And it doesn't matter whether you're a strong government or a soft government like Dadisana or a strong government like Jaya. As I said, Jaya Jawardena had to nationalize the private medical college. But Premadasa, no. Premadasa managed to took Professor Nalin De Silva and threw him out of the Colombo University, or rather GL Pires did, because GL Pires was the vice chancellor under Premadasa. And Champika's guys were in the student movement. They couldn't do a thing. Why? Because they were shot. Nobody shot them. It's because Premadasa's flank was covered. Nobody thought he was selling out the country. Nobody thought that he was not for the poor people. He had a profile, a populist profile, a nationalist profile, though it was a UNP government, so it's nothing to do with green. It's nothing to do with the 3 letters UNP. It's to do with whether or not you're seen as a free market fundamentalist who doesn't care and wants to open everything up for profit and give everything away to foreigners. Then you generate a backlash. What you're seeing here is a backlash. And what happens is that even people who supported you, I'm not talking about voters, I was talking about Handunethe in Parliament. You know, one of the most important things that Handunethe said? He said, all of us, the whole opposition will unite against you. Now, this is the JVP. They hate Mahinda Rajapaksa. They brought him down. What would make one of the most decent parliamentarians of the JVP, Sunil Handunethe, probably the most respected, lose his cool and say, yeah, we'll all unite? And he's talking about the JO and everybody else. Why? It's the UNP. It's the arrogance of this sort of free marketeering government.
Well, before we wrap up, I think we should touch on the historic visit by Modi to the US and also the cancellation of the Iftar celebrations at the White House, which is a tradition.
It started not as a tradition, but it started in 1804, President Thomas Jefferson. It became a tradition from the 1990s, and it was abruptly discontinued. Even by the US Embassy here. Last year they had the Iftar.
Is it because of Prime Minister Modi's visit that they...
No, it can't be, surely. Whatever it is, it sends mixed signals even to the United States allies such as Saudi Arabia. Now, President Trump was down there in Saudi Arabia. He made a big show of it.
Yes.
So did the Saudis. But what are the Saudis going to think when Trump dumps the Iftar? I mean, it's against all Muslims. He's washing his hands off. What's the signal to Saudi Arabia, to the Gulf states, which support the United States? It's not just the Iranians and so on. There are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. This does not make sense. As for Prime Minister Modi's visit, well, it's one of the most important alliances in the world, and it matters to Sri Lanka because we are on the doorstep of this alliance between the world's sole superpower, the United States, which is kind of in deep trouble.
Involving an arms deal.
And the regional, I mean, it's like Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
But the Indians are going to have to calibrate because traditionally they have a very good relationship when it comes to arms supplies with Russia.
And it's also going to threaten China just a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. It's part of this thing that's happening in Asia. India versus China, US versus China. Therefore, US and India versus China and Russia. And now, very interestingly, the Pakistanis, who have always been close to the Chinese, are getting closer to Russia. So, that's the grand game, the great game in which Sri Lanka is being tossed about to and fro.
Balance, maybe.
Balance, I think we've lost our balance, but we are in this cockpit of tension and competition.
But we have a great advantage in balancing it out because we are...
we do.
But are we executing?
I don't think so. I think we've lost our balance domestically and externally.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jayatilaka.
Thank you
for your insights. It was a pleasure having you with us on Vantage Point tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. You can send us your comments, your views, your questions to Newsfirst.lk. We are open for all of it. Until we meet again next fortnight, this is Stephanie Lazarus signing off.